Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to the AQMP Advisory Group. Before we get started, I'm going to turn it over to Zorik just to do a little logistical information.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Zorik Pirvesi. I'm Planning and Rules Manager with South Coast AQMD. A couple of quick housekeeping items. There are people calling in from two locations, one at a Resources Board location in Sacramento, and also one from San Francisco EPA's location. So those who are calling in, please place your cell phone on silent or vibrant mode. We'll get into introductions of people on the call from those two locations. And also, this meeting is being webcast, and people can also call in and listen in, actually, during our meeting. But we also want to offer the opportunity for those of you who are following us on webcast or by phone. If you have any questions, you can email your questions during the meeting to AQMPteam@aqmd.gov. So that's AQMPteam@aqmd.gov, and we'll try to obviously respond to your questions. In terms of, sorry, I missed the most important part. The restroom locations are located outside the doorway to your left. And in the event of any emergencies, obviously you'll be notified to take shelter or evacuate the building. I think that's all we have.
All right, so just the first agenda item, we'll do some introductions around the main table. Again, I'm Philip Fine, Deputy Executive Officer at South Coast AQMD Planning and Rules Division. We'll go to my right.
Wayne Astry, Executive Officer, South Coast AQMD.
Sylvia Vanderspeig, Chief of the Air Quality Planning Branch at the California Air Resources Board.
Hi, Barbara Baird, Chief Deputy Counsel, South Coast AQMD.
Megan Lorenz, I'm in the General Counsel's Office, South Coast AQMD.
Good morning, I'm Amy Zimfer. I'm an Assistant Director in the Air Division at EPA Region 9.
Dwayne Baker, Deputy Executive Director, San Bernardino County Transportation Authority and Council of Governments.
David Rothbart, representing the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works.
Kurt Coleman, Executive Director, Southern California Air Quality Alliance.
Richard Parks from Redeemer Community Partnership in South Los Angeles.
Kendall Ascension, LA Chamber.
Hi, Tammy Yamasaki, Southern California Edison.
Lakshmi Jairam, Future Ports.
Sarah Wiltfong, BizFed.
Andy Silva, County of San Bernardino.
Alexander Fong, San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments.
Greg Osterman. from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Martha Masters, Riverside County Transportation Commission.
Alyssa Beltran, Los Angeles Department of County Public Health.
Bridget McCann, WISPA. Peter Herzog with NAOT, the Commercial Real Estate Development Association.
Peter Okarowski, consultant to the Association of American Railroads, BNSF, and Union Pacific.
Barbara Radline, South Coast AQMD staff, CEQA.
Kelly Gamino, South Coast AQMD Air Quality Specialist in Planning.
Brittany Gallivan, South Coast AQMD Air Quality Specialist in Planning.
Sang-Mei Lee, South Coast AQMD Supervisor in Air Quality Modeling and Emissions.
Kalam Chang, South Coast AQMD Program Supervisor.
Rumshun Loa, Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG, Air Quality and Conformity Program Manager.
Zorik Pirvesi, I'm Planning and Rules Manager with South Coast AQMD. Those of you on the phone, if you could also introduce yourselves, please. No, EPN. Anybody calling in from ARB? I thought they could ask questions.
Zorik, are they able to speak or are they all muted?
Yes, they can.
They can speak now,
okay. Hearing none from ARB. Anybody calling in from EPA's offices?
Hi, this is John Anvarsky. I'm here by myself today.
Hi, John. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, hi, and I'm Sarah Reese. I'm an Assistant Deputy Executive Officer in Planning here at the district.
Okay, with that, we'll get started. And again, we did provide minutes. If anyone has any issues with the minutes, let us know. We don't really do formal approvals, but we do want to record what happened at every meeting. So if anyone has any issues now or later, just let us know and we can make revisions. And then just before we get started with the presentations today, I just wanted to give a little bit of an update here. So as a reminder, in the 2016 AQMP, our last AQMP, we provided updates and new SIPs to EPA on 5 different standards. We try to do integrated planning towards all the deadlines and all the pollutants and all the standards when we do our AQMPs. So as a reminder, these were the 5 the standards for which we were included in the 2016 AQMP along with the due dates and the standards. And there has been action from EPA this year on that submittal. So we're pleased that pretty much all the ozone submittals from the 2016 AQMP have been approved. The 24-hour PM 2.5 SIP has been largely approved. There's one little piece we're still working with Region 9 on, and due to a recent court case on how we're supposed to implement the contingency measure requirements of the Clean Air Act. These are not the same contingency measure requirements we're talking about today in terms of 182E5. But the other contingency measure requirements, I guess we're calling them BAR contingency measure requirements after the court case, we still have to work on EPA. We have some solutions, so we're working through that over the next year, and EPA has handled that in different ways for the different submittals. Happy to go into details on that if anyone's interested. It's pretty wonky. In any case, just an update on where we are on the approvals is here for your information. So does anyone have any questions on that? Go ahead, Peter.
I apologize, I didn't read the full email yesterday.
Talking to the mic?
Sorry, I apologize, I didn't read ARB's full email yesterday, but I recall seeing something come through on changes to MFAC to reflect the SAFE rule, and if I remember right, they were doing correction factors. Can you put that in perspective for me? I think I have a feeling for it, but I know you guys are much better at that than I am.
I mean, we could wait till SCAG presents, but
if you want to do it later, that's
hold
fine.
it there because I figure that issue will come up as part of SCAG's presentation. But yeah, I did see that too, and maybe you can. Carb is here; they can give an update. Any other questions on? Dwayne, did you have a question? Harvey, do you want to come to the mic? There's a mic in the back. You can stand.
Hello, my name's Harvey Eder. I'm with the Public Solar Power Coalition, and I wonder if anyone knows, is Adrian Martinez coming here for the Environmental Justice Committee and for what they're doing? Because I'm concerned about them not being represented here, other than me.
I don't know if Adrian's going to be here.
He told me yesterday he was going to be here.
Well, I can't.
I don't know what's up anyway. So you don't.
I don't control the schedule. So.
Okay. Anybody else know? No. All right. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions on this first piece? Okay. With that, I'll turn it over to Sarah to give kind of an update on where we are with this contingency measure plan submittal.
Great. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to cover these slides. These should look very familiar to you in large part because I've given this presentation to you before and also in other forum, but just for completeness and background, wanting people to understand where we are with our contingency measure plan for the 9097 8-hour ozone standard. At the end, we have some newer information talking about our response to some public comments we received on the contingency measure plan, as well as outlining the sanctions clock and detailing potential sanctions. So with that, just giving a little background, we are an extreme non-attainment area for ozone. We have an attainment date of June 2024, which we're working towards. Initially in 2007, that was our initial submission for our state implementation plan. Back in our 2016 AQMP, that's when we updated our control strategy for attaining the standard. That included both defined measures, so specific measures with targets for emission reductions, as well as these further deployment of cleaner technology measures, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail. This plan was approved by EPA. It was under Section 182(e)(5) of the Clean Air Act, aka the black box provision. Extreme non-attainment areas for ozone are allowed to refer to these further deployment measures in demonstrating attainment with the standard. When you do rely on black box measures, you do have an obligation under the Clean Air Act to come up with contingency measures to cover these black box measures 3 years before the attainment date. And so this is the plan that we are developing now. We've been working with CARB in coming up with this draft plan. This chart just shows you the progress we've made in NOx emission reductions over time. And as you're aware, NOx is the key pollutant of concern that we need to reduce to attain the ozone standards. And you can see since our 1997 baseline, we've made some pretty drastic reductions in NOx. In our 2012 baseline, it's over half reduced from what our 1997 baseline was. But you can also see we still have a ways to go. In 2023, the carrying capacity we need to reach, which is the amount of NOx that we can have in the atmosphere and still meet the standard, that's 141 tons per day. You can see we still have an additional 11% or 128 tons per day that we need to reduce in order to be able to meet that level. And so in our 2016 AQMP, our control strategy, again, we had to get down to our carrying capacity of 141 tons per day. We did come up with 27 tons per day of defined measures, but I want to point out these further deployments of cleaner technology measures, which were totaled 108 tons per day. So that was still a fairly significant chunk of what we needed to achieve in order to be able to attain the standard. And again, these Section 182(e)(5) measures, again, just allowed for extreme non-attainment areas. You're allowed to rely on the development of newer technologies because extreme non-attainment areas, the Act provides a 20-year period in which to attain the standards. And so the understanding is within those 20 years, additional technologies become available, additional regulations could become available, and so you can refer to those developments. Again, EPA approved our reliance on these measures in our 2016 plan, but then we are now working towards developing our contingency measure plan. And so our draft contingency measure plan has three main strategies associated with it, or components. First, we have further identified emission reduction strategies that we'll talk about. We are pointing to additional incentive funding that we've been very successful in using in the past to be able to turn over fleets and get cleaner equipment in fleets. And then we'll talk about federal measures and responsibilities, as those are a fairly significant chunk of the emissions we need to reduce to attain the standard. In terms of our identified emission reduction strategies, we have several that we've addressed here. I'm not going to go through them in a lot of detail as we have talked about them in the past, but they total between 24 and 26 tons per day. So it's a chunk of that 108 tons per day we need to meet. It doesn't go all the way, so there's still some additional measures we need to go through. Part of this 24 to 26 ton per day amount is CARB's innovative new measures, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. So, these include a number of measures that CARB's coming up with. So off-road diesel engine standard, or a Tier 5 off-road diesel engine standard, some emission reductions associated with CARB's, the state's green contracting policies, looking at some additional measures that we can get for locomotives, which would have NOx emission reductions, also some reductions associated with some VMT measures, and then co-benefits of the climate change scoping plan for building electrification, which we expect would get some NOx reductions as well. In terms of additional incentive funding, in our 2016 AQMP, we identified that we needed about $1 billion in incentives per year over a 14-year period to be able to attain the standards. We've updated our current information based on our latest data. Right now, our expected future funding is about $800 million over 4 years. Again, that's coming from a variety of sources, including AB 617 incentives, Carl Moyer, VW settlement funds, etc. But we clearly need additional funding in order to meet our standards. And so we do have our voting district authorization legislation, which if we're successful with that, and then we're successful in getting it on the ballots, could provide us $1.4 billion per year. You are still exploring other mechanisms. If we are successful with the voting district authorization legislation, we expect we'll be able to use that funds to get a 15 ton per day reduction in 2023. This chart, again, just details the trends in for different major sources over time since 1997. And one thing to note here is that sources that are under CARB's control or jointly between EPA and CARB, as well as under South Coast control, we see that they've been declining fairly significantly over time. So you see very sharp declines in emissions from light and medium duty vehicles, some declines in our heavy duty vehicles, also for commercial harbor craft, etc. The bottom line, the red line, that's important to note. That's the one that's subject to federal control. You can see that that line has been flat over the years. In fact, it's probably increased a little bit since 1997. And in 2023, that's the most significant chunk of emissions that we need to address. So looking at that contribution of federal sources in 2023, you can see it's 36% of the emissions that we have at that time. So it's the single largest chunk. Biggest part of that are the ocean-going vessels, but still we have still significant emissions from the other on-road sources, trains, aircraft, etc. So we looked at potential federal measures that the government could take to be able to reduce emissions in those different source categories, looking at the low NOx heavy-duty vehicles. And right now, EPA is seeking to develop a new rule for heavy-duty vehicles. It likely will not be in time for 2023, but there's other measures that EPA could take in that sector too, including deploying incentive funds. But we believe that there's some potential there for up to a 35 ton per day reduction. Similarly, on ocean-going vessels, either through regulatory initiatives or through incentives, up to a 28 ton per day reduction. Low NOx locomotives have a similar opportunity, and then low NOx aircraft as well. And so adding all of that, we think we can get up to a 78 ton per day reduction from those federal measures. In terms of when you add that all up for our contingency measure plan, we have identified emission reduction strategies of 24 to 26 tons per day. From our additional incentive program or funding, 15 ton per day. And then that leaves 67 to 69 ton per day from these additional federal measures. That gets us to our 108 ton per day that was identified in the black box. So key public comments that we received on our contingency plan. Number one, some concerns about available funding. What happens if we're unable to get the funding or enough of the funding that we need to be able to achieve the emission reductions we've identified? It is a real concern. We continue to pursue all available funding opportunities, both within the state and with the legislature. We may have to rely more heavily on federal standard or federal measures if we are not successful in getting the full amount of funding that we need to get our emission reductions. We also received comments on zero emission technologies for the residential sector and co-benefits that could come from greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, which would have NOx reductions as well. So to that, we have developed a net emissions analysis tool, which helps evaluate and model emission reductions associated with deployment of zero and near zero emission technologies for the residential sector. We do continue to implement our 2016 AQMP, which identified specific measures for zero and near zero appliances for NOx, and then also additional technologies in the residential and commercial sectors. Part of that was $47 million in incentive project funding that we awarded in January of 2019. Of that, $14 million was for projects in the residential and commercial sectors. We are also looking at some potential rulemaking in this sector in the 2020 to 2022 timeframe. And then again, CARB is also accounting for some co-benefits from their 2017 climate change scoping plan, which we also believe will result in additional NOx reductions. Other comments we received, so whether there's additional emission reductions that we can count from the transportation sector and from transportation planning initiatives. The emission benefits for transportation control measures are already included in the 2016 AQMP. We are working with SCAG and other stakeholders on the development of the next regional transportation plan, and that would be included in our 2022 AQMP. And then finally, we had questions about sanctions and timing of sanctions or what the sanction clock looks like. And so for that, we've posted information on our websites and provided that to folks. But I'll go over that in the next few slides. So in terms of the timeline for sanctions, looking back to when we have to submit our plan, the plan is due to EPA December 31st of this year, so in just over a month. At that point, EPA has up to 6 months to make a completeness finding. EPA then has to make a decision on the plan. They either approve or disapprove the plan. They have up to 12 months from the completeness finding to do that. Then if we don't get the plan up to speed, there's EPA has a clock in which to implement sanctions. So the first sanction is regarding increased offset ratios, and I'll talk more about what those are in the next slide. But EPA has up to 18 months from when they've disapproved the plan to be able to initiate those sanctions. And then the second set of sanctions regarding highway sanctions, so withholding federal highway funds, and then also implementing a federal implementation plan. And that happens within 24 months from EPA's disapproval of a plan. Now, these are all up to 12 months, up to 18 months, up to 24 months. EPA can act a lot faster. So theoretically, EPA could act very quickly upon submission of our plan in December to disapprove it and move forward with a number of these sanctions in a very fast time. Now, they are subject to federal notice and comment requirements, so there is some process around that, but I just wanted folks to be aware that EPA could move faster than what these clocks allow. And in terms of the detail of the federal sanctions, the increased offset ratio. So what that means is under our new source review program for new projects or modifications of projects, the results in emissions increases, you have to offset those emissions. And it's not a one-to-one ratio. Right now, we are subject to 1.2 to 1 ratio. So you have to offset by 1.2 times those emissions for those new or modified projects. If the sanction for increased offset ratio hits, then it's a 2-for-1 offset that we have to hit, which is a fairly significant impact to permitting. The federal implementation plan, there could be some fairly severe measures associated with that. So one of the classic measures that is discussed when discussing FIPS are no drive days, for example, or emission caps for airlines, for marine vessels around the ports, for railroads. Could also be something like gas rationing. So there could be some fairly draconian measures associated with this. And then for the withholding of highway funding, that could have significant impacts regionally as well. There are some exemptions for certain transit and safety projects, but it still would have a pretty big impact on our region. So just to summarize, we at the district and AQMP have done everything under existing authority and ability to reduce emissions, but it's still not enough. And we really need all levels of government to come to the table to be able to take action and be able to achieve the emission reductions we need to attain the standard. We do need more incentive funding. That's been proven to be very effective at quickly accelerating turnover of the fleet and getting emission reductions and introducing newer technologies. And then finally, we absolutely need federal action on the sources that are subject to federal authority and regulation for those sources that California cannot address. So to give you an idea of our public process moving forward, I think you've seen forward through all of the animation. Right now we are in our November 21st advisory group meeting, so we've had several meetings already leading up to this. In our December 6th board meeting, the board will be considering our draft contingency measure plan, and then CARB's board will be considering this plan in their 12th and 13th December board meeting. So with that, I'll take any questions.
I'll just add, I think we know now that it'll be considered on the 12th.
Yes, it will.
At the CARB board meeting, December 12th.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. One question I have is, obviously, you're going to be, these are contingent measures. What's the clock for compliance with the contingent measures under the plan?
That's actually a good question because I think we've mentioned it before. The way this part of the Act is written is a little confusing. They're called contingency measures because they're supposed to be implemented upon a determination that the 182E5 measures did not achieve the reductions that were intended, right? So that can really happen anytime, but presumably would happen in your attainment year that was not achieved. However, these contingency measures are supposed to be implemented in that attainment year. So the Clean Air Act has this weird little catch-22 timing issue that's a little hard to figure out how it will be interpreted. But the safest assumption is we need to plan to get these reductions in 2023. David.
Phil, regarding the sanctions, as far as the offset ratio, I assume if that is triggered, anything coming out of the priority reserve would also be impacted as well for the offset ratio?
I believe, yeah, in that accounting we use 1.2 now. Is that correct? So that would go to 2 to 1.
Okay. And then another question, kind of parallel on sanctions, would be when the Section 185 trigger would be for those penalties?
So that's not technically a sanction. That is triggered not part of this planning process. That's triggered if the data show we don't actually attain the standard by the date. So it's just kind of a separate process. So as soon as EPA would do a failure to attain determination, which is different than a failure to submit a plan or failure to have an adequate plan or failure to implement a plan, that's actually failure to have clean data by the right date. And then it's automatic Section 185 fees, which have a formula in the Clean Air Act. So stationary sources would be subject to those fees.
So 2024-ish depends on what happens, but around that time frame.
Yeah, I don't know the timing after a determination is made. Maybe.
And my concern is, I hope you get the funding that you need, and I hope we get to attainment by 2023, but it's looking rather challenging. And I'm curious, as far as Rule 317, we had a fix for the penalties being applied to major stationary sources when the problem's really mobile sources. Looking at 317, is there a way to extend that process so the stationary sources don't get penalized?
So that'll be challenging too. So we do have a little bit of a buffer built up in 317 now, and maybe that'll last a little bit. We can apply that potentially towards this. But the way 317 works is we're taking credit for surplus emissions from mobile sources. But as you see in this document and in the 2016 AQMP, we're taking explicit credit for mobile source reductions through incentive programs. So there still may be something we haven't accounted for, but we need to account for everything. So we're not sure there's going to be surplus in the future to go to. So if we don't attain by the attainment date, then those fees are a real potential. We can potentially hit the stationary sources.
And just lessons learned. When this came up a number of years ago, we went back to DC with Barry and tried to work something out and had the idea of the Clean Air Act would just have to be changed for one minor provision. And no one wants to open up the Clean Air Act. So if this is the way it's going to go, if we can get our thinking caps on of maybe some other creative solution, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll have to, as part of the 2022 AQMP, which is obviously a longer term plan, as we move forward with this, we'll start getting feedback from EPA hopefully on this submittal and start working through some of those potentialities, I guess. All right, we'll just keep going around the table. So right there.
Lakshmi Jairam, Future Ports. I have two questions. One is about the NEAT model. Do you know when the beta version is coming out?
So what is it?
The NEAT model.
Oh, when is it going to come out?
When is it going to come out?
We have a working group, and I think we're close to, if we haven't already, shared a kind of a beta version just within the working group to get some feedback. And once we get that feedback and we quote finalize it, it'll still be used kind of as a planning tool, and it's not ready to go wide to be used for say an installer to figure out the best situation. But as a planning tool, we'll be using it internally, and maybe as part of the next AQMP, we'll have to share some results if we're working on measures that are based on that. But the beta version we're really close to that, and there's other modules we'd like to add that will come in like version 2.0. So we're working on it.
Okay. My second question is, have you seen the article by Ronald Cohen in the Science Journal that came out earlier this month?
Yes.
Was talking about how NOx stays longer, persistence in the atmosphere in Los Angeles. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you look at it affecting your AQMP modeling?
Yeah, so we're looking at, you know, speaking to the person who wrote the article and the authors, and we're still evaluating the paper at first glance, and it looks like it actually does support our current thinking of the chemistry of ozone in the atmosphere in terms of the different chemical regimes and how quickly, and so the one of the main points of the article is that, you know, you don't, for, you know, a specific amount of NOx reductions, you don't always get a specific amount of ozone reductions. It depends on the atmosphere. It depends on which regime you're in chemistry. It gets complicated. So we're still evaluating it, but first glance, it looks like it supports what our models have already show. But it's a pretty complex, and it's an interesting paper because it came at it from a very different direction, from some novel measurements, satellite measurements. So we're still evaluating. But at this point, we don't think it's inconsistent with the fact that we are NOx limited, we need NOx reductions, and at certain points in time, it's very challenging because you get the NOx reductions, but you don't see the same ozone reductions result, at least in certain times and places. Does that answer your question? So.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. On one of your concluding slides, you mentioned that all levels of governments should be taking action to reduce emissions. Coming from the city's lens in the San Gabriel Valley, a lot of our cities already adopted climate action plans and energy action plans, but we understand that our cities are also very limited in their resources. So my question is, what do you believe that our cities can do with their limited resources? And does AQMD offer any resources for our cities? Or what can the councils of governments like COGS can do to help with the efforts?
So that's a whole discussion. When we say levels of government, the first thing we think of is, you know, us, CARB, EPA. These are the air quality, have that air quality responsibility. But it also will require cooperation from cities, counties, COGS, in several ways I can think of. So number one, we do provide resources to cities and counties. One is just as a technical resource, but also money. There's the AB 2766 program. And in other ways, we work with the cities and counties as they're working on their climate action plans. So there's a lot of interaction there. One thing we'd like to do is there are all these climate action plans in different jurisdictions. We don't necessarily look at those to see if there's some SIP creditable emission reductions in those. And some of them are, we've got to be careful about double counting with some of the scoping plans and some of the other CARB measures, but there could be some things in there that we are getting real emission reductions that we might be able to account for in our plan. So we're happy to work together on that. And then there are, it's not just plans. I mean, the cities and counties have authorities, land use and otherwise, that can actually reduce emissions. And so if there's ideas out there, we've seen some, like the County of Riverside is putting some fees on warehouse development, and some of that money goes back into and could go back into incentive programs to get reductions. So there's lots of ideas out there how cities and counties, planning agencies can get more involved. So maybe we can dive into that as we move into the next AQMP, because I think that's a great topic, and maybe we can include more of it in the air quality management plan than we have in previous years.
And just to touch upon one point Dr. Fine made is that, you know, in land use authority, so cities and local governments will often have different authority that we lack. So we don't have land use authority, but that's something that could be helpful in getting emission reductions from some of our sources. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to work together and see what's possible.
MSRC also gives a lot of money to cities and counties for their fleets. There's Moyer, all our other incentive programs. So we'll dive in early next year as we get ready for the next plan. Any other questions on Sarah's presentation?
There are a couple of questions from the web.
So we did get some questions. We had to mute the phone because we've had some problems with people snoring and things, but people can submit their questions via the internet. I mean, through email. So, Rick will go ahead and.
Yeah, we have two questions from Bill Lamar from California Small Business Alliance. I'll read his question. If the feds and the state would take affirmative action to reduce the sources under their control, would you still need to raise $1 billion per year for 14 years? If not, how much additional funding do you need?
That's a good question. So in the 2016 AQMP, the roughly $15 billion we laid out assumed all the way through 2031 that those reductions would be achieved essentially 100% through incentive programs. But we recognize that regulations can achieve some of those reductions as well, especially in 2031. We're really up against it for 2023 in terms of how quickly regulations can take effect. But for 2031, there's actions being worked on now at EPA, at the state level, that will start eating into the reductions that were assigned essentially to that $14 billion. So it could be less, but I want to caution against that $14 billion number. That's already 3 years old. So we're doing some work now, we've mentioned it before, to really refine that estimate and assign more specifically the types of equipment that we can do most cost effectively and for how much and when. So we're working on that as for the 22 AQMP for our voting district authorization. We're making some progress on that. We'll be presenting it to this group in the coming months. So is it still going to be $14 billion? It could be more, could be less, but we're refining those estimates with a much more sophisticated and deep dive into how the incentives might work.
Okay, let me read the second question. California's Attorney General is infamous for filing lawsuits against the federal government for one thing or another. Is it reasonable for the state or South Coast to sue EPA for shirking their agreed-upon responsibilities for reducing emissions from sources under their control and impeding our efforts to reach attainment? Clearly, no matter how much we reduce or how much we spend, we cannot reach attainment by continuing to overregulate the station resources under your jurisdiction.
Why don't you address that? Word Sue, I refer to Barbara.
So the first answer to that is in some respects we already have. We filed a challenge to EPA's revocation of the waiver for greenhouse gas and zero emission vehicles that was issued by EPA just a couple months ago. We've also filed a challenge against another part of the federal government, the Department of Transportation, which has issued a regulation stating that greenhouse gas standards and the ZEV requirements are preempted by the Energy Policy and Conservation Act. So those are both areas where we've already joined into a battle that was also already initiated by California and about 20 other states, but we have our own separate lawsuit in that regard, and we are actively considering all possible options, which we would, of course, have to discuss with our board in closed session before we could discuss it here.
All right. Any other questions in the room? All right. Seeing none. Next in our. Oh wait, there we go. Harvey, why don't you come to the stand-up mic over there?
Hello. I'm Harvey Yetter. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. Several things. I did not see the whole presentation. I saw something about zero emission vehicles and renewables and the plan that does the thing that you guys have been working on that we've been going to these meetings for. I haven't seen the most recent thing. It grew out of solar negotiations for the Solar New Deal, with Dr. Burke in the 16-17 plan. And so I'm concerned about that, and it was heavy on conservation. For 40, 50 years, you're conserving the existing infrastructure rather than building a solar renewable new modified system. And I'm very concerned now, and back to the comments that were made here, that the environmental justice community is not here. Adrian Martinez is not here, and the folks that he works with. This is outrageous, and I don't think this meeting should continue. I've got to call into Dr. Burke and his assistant. I've got to call into Fabian. This should not continue and be under a cloud in a lesser country, but with that, what's happening back east, I don't know. You'd wonder what happened to these people, their health and safety, straight up. We're talking about very substantial issues here. The future of the investor-owned utilities is challenged now. 22 mayors and council people have signed letters. Wiener and the governor, they're talking a third of PG&E's system for co-ops and the state. And this is at the governor's request. This is all in play now, and I don't know why they're not here. I'm really concerned. I don't think this should be considered, and we can come back next week, but this is important. You know, this is the numbers that have been carved out. We did the first study for the PUC in the solar transition in the 70s, and worked as a consultant to Turn and whatnot, and the PUC, and we did the low-income solar equity program with nobody from this district or this entity has even looked at, and the Solar New Deal, which has got 100 exhibits, which we've given to Naomi Klein and whatnot. Look, and the city of LA's got the Green New Deal. There's a state that's all in play. The district is 42%. We're talking about the SIP for the state. Everything's in play. Now, public power in the state between existing munis, special districts, and whatnot is about a quarter. Another quarter is for CCAs, community choice, and other models. Now we're bringing into a co-op. So we brought the first co-ops 45 years ago. And in that solar transition, PG&E kept on trying to take the co-op idea away from us. In the record from the late 70s, early 80s. Look, co-ops were started in the 30s by Roosevelt, okay? They would not electrify the rural areas. They only went to the cities where they could make money on it, okay? And basically, there are a couple thousand of them now around the country. The middle of the country, the T&D systems, basically co-ops, public power. Look, I don't know. I don't think we should continue. Oh, yeah, we should take lunch until Dr. Burke gets back to us.
Thanks for your comments.
This is done under protest, and we are filing in Ninth Circuit, and we talked with the court this morning, and we're going for a writ of mandate. You did not put our stuff into the record. You did not evaluate it at the district or the state or EPA in this contingency or any other thing. And Adrian told me to come here and talk about solar, and he's not here. Also, we're filing a writ of mandate that this has to be included. We're filing a stay that this has to be evaluated before any of this proceeds. And this is backsliding and is whistleblowing, and that's what we're doing here, etc. There's more.
Thanks for your comments,
Harvey.
Harvey.
On my feet.
Just so everyone knows, Adrian, environmental justice groups are all member of this committee. This advisory group, they all get invited. I can't control who comes. We do have frequent offline conversations with all those groups regarding everything we talked about today. Yeah.
I'm looking at slide 16, and I see that federal sources account for 36% of our NOx emissions. But on slide 18, the expectation is that they're going to account for 63% of the savings.
Because they fell behind. They fell way behind. We have done, if you look at slide 15 and see where we started, we, South Coast, CARB, on the state regulated sources and the local regulated sources have achieved those reductions over those time periods, while the federal sources have not. So that's one reason why they are now responsible for more, number one. Number two, that's just the remaining amount, because if you go back to slide 8, for instance, there were already specific measures that we have control over that are in the plans, right? So it's not 63% of everything. You have to account for all the things that we have control over that we can be specific about. And the other thing is that's where the easier emission reductions remain because not as much has been done.
Right, I understand that. It just seems disingenuous for us to look for 63% of the reductions from a place that we have no control over.
Okay, well, we understand the comment, but we also, if you take the long-term view, these are reductions that should have happened earlier to keep pace with the reductions that the state and the local agencies have achieved. Any other questions? Harvey, if you could keep it brief, you've already had several minutes.
You all have just taken an hour and you got more on deck. Hello. Okay. You're not going to meet these goals. You're not going to meet the 23. We can do it with solar electric trucks, either batteries or other models or hydrogen fuel cells and whatnot. And co-ops, we've talked to the 617 groups. They're very interested in this and want to do this stuff. We set up this kind of stuff 40 years ago when the low-income solar equity program was the first low-income earmark, 10% because of the equity issue, raising, instead of taxing through the rate base. And also antitrust, which is not being, there's meetings right now with Volvo in this district that we can't get into talking about them getting into the electric vehicles market. This is extending their monopolies into a competitive market. It's got to be outlawed. You, the state, and federal justice departments have got to slam this stuff right now. It's outrageous. You're not going to meet these criteria, and your federal funding is going to be challenged from 23. And this thing about renewable natural gas being brought into the state is illegal, and the stuff like City Santa Monica, 200 buses they get from Texas out of a landfill. Now, we put this into the plan. I've been talking about it for 10 years. Drug-resistant antibiotics, antifungals. I incorporate a recent article in the New York Times, in the Wall Street Journal, that these numbers are in the hundreds of thousands per year, and that each 1,000 deaths is $9 billion per year. We're not looking at this. You didn't have to report deaths in hospitals until the beginning of last year in the state. It's from waste systems. 70% of human antibiotics are used on animals in the feedlots, and then from the sewer systems in the landfills.
Right. Thanks, Harvey.
So you're circulating drug-resistant antibiotics into the natural gas system, and you're not looking at it because you're totally ignoring that, and the health departments and the state knows it's a sham. There's other stuff.
So we're gonna get to the next presentation.
From the 16 plan in the thumb drive. It was open, and then you purged Naomi Klein's book and Piketty's book, The Economist, from working on equity and the threat to the democracies.
All right. So we're going to move on to the next presentation from our colleague at SCAG. We're going to talk about the Regional Transportation Plan.
And thank you, Dr. Fang. Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Rongshen Luo, SCAG Air Quality and Conformity Program Manager. My supervisor, Mr. Ping Chang, cannot be here today due to a conflict, so I'll give the presentation on his behalf. As some of you may be aware, SCAG's Regional Council, our governing board, approved the public release of our next draft 2020 Regional Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy, RTP-SES. We also called Connect SoCal 2 weeks ago for public review. So my presentation will be overview of SCAG's draft Connect SoCal. This slide shows the outline of my presentation. I will provide some general background information. Then I will focus on the key plan strategies in our Connect SoCal. We call them making connections. And then I'll touch on a couple major plan performance outcomes as related to AQMP. Finally, we will be very brief next steps. Next slide. Okay, first some general background information. For those of you who are not familiar with SCAG, SCAG is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, for Southern California. We cover 6 counties in whole Southern California, with the exception of San Diego. We also cover 4 air basins, including the entire South Coast Air Basin. And we cover, actually there are 5 air districts within SCAG region, including South Coast Air Districts. And there are a total of 26 non-intermittent and maintenance areas. As an MPO, SCAG's main responsibility is to develop this long-term regional transportation plan, sustainable community strategy, and also a short-term federal transportation improvement program, FTIP, which implements the long-range RTP-SES. In addition, as required by the California Health and Safety Codes, SCAG is responsible for providing socio-economic growth forecast and the travel projections, activity data for the preparation of air quality management plans, or AQMPs, throughout SCAG region. In addition, we'll also prepare a portion of the South Coast AQMP, commonly known as Appendix 4C, which are the regional transportation plan, sustainable community strategies, and the transportation control measures as part of the Appendix 4C. And therefore, the final Connexo call, which is scheduled to be adopted by our regional council next April, will constitute the regional transportation strategies as part of our Appendix 4C. Next few slides are about some existing conditions. As air districts does here for the AQMPs, they do emission inventory for the base year. So SCAG staff will also analyze the existing conditions on the ground. Our base year is 2016, so all the next few slides about the existing condition as of 2016, which serve as the starting points for our draft Connexo CAL. This first slide number 5, shows where people live by county, housing tenure, as well as housing type in 2016. So as you can see, more than half of people live in LA County. About half of the people either are owners or renters. And over 60% of housing are single-family housings. The next slide shows where people work, especially the top industries by county. As you can see, the major industry that people work for vary quite substantially from county to county. Slides number 7 shows how we travel by different trip purposes. And as you can see, the travel modes that people use vary actually quite substantially from different trip purposes. Please note on the last column, if you can tell, even though we do have a pretty extensive transit, actually also expanding very rapidly, it only accounts for less 4% of all trip purposes. Next slide, 8. It shows our massive transportation system. We have a lot of roadways, transit network, back network, a lot of 7 commercial airports, and certainly you're aware of the ports, seaports, especially ports of Long Beach and LA. And this massive transportation system does help to move a lot of people and goods for this region. The next 3 slides are kind of a very simplified kind of 3 steps how we as SCAG we develop our draft Connexo CAL. So the first step is prepare the growth forecast. As you can see from the slides, we project that the whole SCAG region is going to grow by 3.6 million populations over the next 29 years. And a little bit over 1 million per decade, which is consistent with the past growth. This is pretty extraordinary. Just put in perspective, and the second largest city in this whole country, which happened to be city of LA, has had 4 million people last year. So we're projecting to add almost another city of LA on top of what we already currently have over the next 20-something years. The next step is really about the transportation projects, and we received those submitted from the 6 county transportation commissions throughout the SCAG region. And for the Draft Connect so-called, there are over 3,000 projects. And as you may be aware, the county transportation commissions are the agencies that are responsible for implementing all the transportation projects programs. Slide number 11, the next step is really to develop the regional policies and strategies. And so certainly there are a few elements. We did a lot of technical analysis. Actually, there are a total of 20 technical supports that support our Draft Connect so-called, which is available on our website for downloading. And our policy committees, there are 3 of them, also our regional council, have held a lot of policy discussions and also provided direction to staff for developing the Draft Connect so-called. Similar to what Editor does here for the outreach, SCAG also has conducted a very extensive interagency consultation and public outreach, including public works, town halls, and etc. Those are the general background information. I will turn to the core of the plan, which are the key plan strategies. We call them making connections. There are many such strategies, so we group them in 2 general categories. Thank you. Slide number 13 for those on the phone. So first for group, we call it core vision strategies. So these are the strategies that have been established over the past several plan cycles and are really designed to accomplish or achieve the core mission of mobility and sustainability. And as I will go over each of these 6 strategies, this core vision strategy promote the continuation and the evolution of strategies to maintain and better manage the transportation network. As I mentioned earlier, we have massive transportation network for moving both people and goods, while we also aim to expanding mobility choices by locating housing, jobs, and transit closer together, and also increasing investment in transit and complete streets. Next slide, 14. So the first are complete streets. As you can see from the slides, these streets, complete streets, are designed and operated to enable safe access for all roadway users of all ages and abilities. So these include pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, and transit riders. And the complete streets strategy can include traffic calming, bicycle priority streets, we call them bicycle boulevards, and pedestrians connectivity to increase physical activities, improve connectivity to the regional bikeway, greenway networks, local businesses, and parks. Complete streets have experienced tremendous growth since 2016, and will continue to do so as evidenced by the doubled investment. By the way, for each of the 6 core regions, we include, as you can see from slides, we include the major progress since 2016, which is our last plan's adoption, and also highlights of what are included for the Draft Connect so-called. So next strategy is transit backbone. If you have been living in Southern California long enough, you must have experienced the tremendous growth in transit. we have quite a bit rails, certain massive the bus system, and several of the rail projects are currently under construction, such as the regional connector near downtown, and certainly the Purple Line extension to the west side. And a lot of these transportation investment, mostly from local sales measures, has been made to expand the transit system, and the trend will continue as I will show later under the plan finance slide. And next strategy, slide 16, sustainable development. If the regional transportation plan mostly focuses on transportation investments, the sustainable community strategy or SCS portion of the plan really focuses on the land use side. So since 2016, SCAG has provided $23 million in sustainable resources and grants to local partners to support local planning for TOD or transit-oriented development, EVs, and active transportation. For the Draft Connect SoCal, we will focus about 70 to 80% of future growth into the 6 priority areas as shown on the slides. So those are the job centers, transit priority areas, high quality transit areas, neighborhood mobility areas, livable corridor, and the sphere of influence. These so-called priority growth areas follow the principles of center-focused placemaking and are locations where many Connect SoCal strategy can be fully realized. Next slides. As you must be aware, the transportation system, especially the roadways in our region, is really in bad shape due to the Great Recession. So the system preservation and the resilience is really very critical elements of the Draft Connect SoCal. Just want to know that it's not just cheaper to maintain rather than to replace damaged roads. The well-maintained roadways actually provide a lot of air quality benefits because it can reduce the so-called in-train road dust that kick off if the road is broken. Certainly you're familiar with the traditional TDM, TSM, transportation demand management, and transportation system management strategies. We also have made a lot of progress in this area since last plan adoption, especially in terms of express lanes plan expansion. In the Draft Connect SoCal, we will continue additional express lanes, especially on several major freeways. In addition, back in last year, SCAG initiated a study to develop a TDM strategic plan to identify ways in which SCAG and its regional partners can expand the effectiveness and the use of a TDM strategies to achieve regional goals. And the recommendation from a study address knowledge sharing, policy and regulation, partnership, and the TDM programming and the performance management. And for details, you can refer to our congestion management technical report, also the TDM strategic plan. The last call vision strategy is related to goods movement. As you know, goods movement is critically for this region, both economically and environmentally. Not only it creates a lot of jobs, it's a really main engine of economic growth for this region, but also is the largest source of air pollutant emissions. So it's very important for us to maintain a good balance. As you can see from slides, many progress also has been made since 2016. For example, ports, as we all know, they are the largest single source of emissions. They adopted the 2017 Clean Air Action Plan, and SCAG was involved, and then certainly the selection of I-710 source locally preferred alternative has been selected. As you know, a lot of traffic along the I-710, and 25 regional grid separations also have been completed and opened. Connect SoCal in our draft plan propose an environmental strategy to address the air quality impacts of the goods movement, while also allowing for the efficient and safe movement of goods throughout the country. A very critical component of this strategy is really the integration of advanced technology that have several benefits, including air quality improvements, energy security, and economic growth opportunities. In the draft Connect SoCal, we articulate a process to accelerate the development and the deployment of effective technologies, along with key action steps to help the region to reduce dangerous air pollutants as much as possible. While our plan focuses on getting cleaner vehicles on the road quickly, we recognize this must be done with full life cycle consideration of production, use, and disposal impacts. Our plan reaffirms zero and near zero emission technologies as a priority, and also outlines a framework and key actions to reach the goals. And for the process framework and the action steps of that plan, you can refer to our goods movement technical report. So those are the core vision strategies. To augment those strategies, the draft Connect SoCal also propose new strategies and regional initiatives that aim to coalesce policy discussions and also advanced promising strategies that leverage new technologies and partnerships to accelerate the progress and regional planning goals. It's very important to know that SCAG is primarily a planning organization, so we really do not have any regulatory authority. We do not have a lot of funding either. So the key to our success is really to providing planning, to foster partnership, to work with all the stakeholders to implement those strategies in our plan. So this new strategy, as you can see on the slide number 20, 5 of them, they really lie at the intersection of land use, transportation, and innovation, and also we really seek to address trends and emerging challenges while also closing the gap between what can be accomplished through the intensification of the cost strategy I mentioned earlier, and also what must be done to meet the increasingly aggressive greenhouse gas, or GHG reduction targets. The first new strategy, we call it smart cities and job centers. These strategies really aim to catalyze investments across sectors to make virtual access a cost-effective and a reliable option for all types of trips. So that can expand the air quality, congestion, and the VMT reduction benefits that the region currently already realized through the teleworking. Smart city, we also call it e-government. It's really kind of a communication put on steroids, really have a lot of benefits. So with this kind of infrastructure, we can allow the region to communicate in real time through regional telecommunication networks. As you must be aware, the housing affordability has reached a crisis level in this region. So housing supportive infrastructure is very important, critical new strategies. And our regional housing supporting infrastructure strategy really try to help and make it quicker for local jurisdiction to produce the critically needed housing. For example, by implementing tax incremental finance districts, local jurisdictions can plan and implement housing support infrastructures. In addition, for example, like parking, actually parking is really accounts for a large cost for any housing development. So part of the supportive infrastructure strategy is really to look into whether we can downsizing our requirement to make sure housing can be produced more cheaply or affordably. Next slide, Go Zone. So Go Zone are geographic areas where a suite of mobility service options are provided together with incentives to reduce dependency on personal automobiles. And the expanded mobile ecosystem can include increased transit, bike share, enhanced active transportation infrastructure, and incentives such as a fee on solo driving during peak traffic periods. Incentives could encourage the use of share modes or shift the less sensitive trips of the peak time. And in addition, the revenue collected from these fees could be used to fund local transportation investments and support sustainability goals by contributing to reduction in GHG emissions. Also, as you can see from the slides, this in a way is kind of a congestion pricing in a way, but applied to certain areas. And if you have been to downtown LA lately, you must have noticed so many e-scooters, all those bikes, etc. So this is what we call shared mobility and mobility as a services. As you may be aware, actually a lot of our trips are really short trips, into the last mile, the first mile, etc. That really can well served by these scooters, bikes, which really have zero emissions, which is really can help the air quality. And finally, the new strategy we called accelerated electrification. So this strategy offers a holistic and a coordinated approach to electrifying passenger vehicles, transit, and goods movement vehicles. Through greater coordination and a deeper collaboration, this strategy aims to go beyond benefits achieved through state mandates alone. So, for example, in the lighted sector, our draft plan plans for greater incentives to increase the sales of EVs and also strategies to increase the availability of charging infrastructure. And for transit, as you may be aware, last year, the Air Resources Board voted to mandate the purchase of electric buses. And SCAG certainly can facilitate that process by working with transit agencies, which are our key stakeholders, to ensure adequate charging stations and also electricity rates. In the goods movement sector, the goal is really to achieve a zero emission system, fostering early adoption of near zero emission technologies. So that's the new strategies. Next, slide 26. I will briefly cover the investment in our plan. As you can see from the slides, our plan totals over $638 billion through year 2045. One thing to note is that half of the investment really supports the ongoing operation and maintenance for both the transit and the roadways. These are very critical. And on the big pie chart, if you can see, for passenger rail and transit alone, we are planning about half of the 638, which is over $300 billion just for that. Think about it. That's a lot of money. And as I mentioned earlier, the transit only accounts for about 4% of the other trips. Next couple of slides, 27, 28, I really want to touch on the so-called TCMs, or transportation control measures. These TCMs really is a part of the subset of the transportation projects and the programs in our draft plan, which are required to be implemented as a part of SIP. So they are federally enforceable, just all the other district ARB's measures, and they have to be implemented. But it's important to note, though, these TCMs, there are very specific definitions in the Federal Clean Air Act. So these kind of measures, they are transportation project or programs that reduce vehicle use or change traffic flow or congestion conditions. So the technology-based, the fuel-based, and then maintenance-based strategy, they are not TCMs. But we all know those are really the key to emission reductions. So consistent with the Clean Air Act for the SCAG region, actually South Coast, there are 3 categories of TCM, as you can see from here. So the first one is the HOV and higher occupancy toll or express lanes. And the second is certainly transit and a non-motorized and active transportation. And the last is about the intelligence information system. We call it ITS, such as the traffic signalization. And I want to bring next slide, 28. I would like to bring to your attention to the so-called TCM BACM, best available control measure demonstration we did for the last plan. As you know, in the last plan, we did a BACM demonstration under the, I think the 2006 24-hour PM 2.5 series plan. So we hired a consultant. We did a very comprehensive analysis, and to show that the TCM's SCAG has been implementing in the South Coast really constitute the BACM. In other words, we really have the best and the most robust TCMs in this country. Certainly we recognize that we have among the worst air quality in this country too. So the few bullets I show here that shows why we have such a robust TCM. So first of all, we really have a very strong TCM selection process. We call it rollover. So in most places, they usually develop a list of projects, and when they're done, they're done. But the SCAG region, the South Coast region, actually we have a rollover, which means when the new project comes into our RTP SES, so as soon as there's a funding program for the first 2 years, either of the right-of-way or construction, then they automatically become so-called committed TCM. So that's why you have no choice. When projects come in, that 3 type of category project, then they keep going. So when they're done, but then we keep adding a lot of the projects. So that's pretty amazing. We have added thousands of such projects over the past decades. And the second one is very important. We spend so much money on the TCM, actually mainly through local sales measures. I didn't show, but in our plan, we show that actually, I think over maybe about 2/3 of the whole transportation investments are local measures, all the sales measures by different counties. So that's pretty amazing. And most of those money are really earmarked for transit projects. And because of such investment, that's why you must have noticed the transit really has increased pretty dramatically. As part of the BACM recommendation, we show certain different category, certain from 2012, which last plan, to 2040, up to like a 200% increase. And finally, we also look into all the cities throughout the country, and we couldn't find any TCMs that SCAG region has not implemented. The next slide, I want to, certainly our plan really, we have many different goals for our plan. So I will only touch 2 performance outcomes that's really related to the air quality goals. The first one is that our Draft Connect so-called demonstrates transportation conformity. In other words, the Draft Connect so-called is consistent with the goals and objectives of all the applicable cities in the SCAG region, including the South Coast. So I list these 4 items. First one, our plan meets all the applicable emission budgets established in the past South Coast AQMPs for all the milestones. There are so many of them: milestone years, attainment and planning horizon years, for all applicable criteria pollutants, also in the 26 non-permanent maintenance areas. I touched on the TCM. We also ensure that all the TCM in the draft so-called, they're being given funding priorities. So all the projects receive funding, but if any TCM, for whatever reason, their funding, is shortfall, then they are required to actually shift funding to support those projects. And also, they are required to be implemented on schedule per the scope. If for whatever reason will be delayed significantly or cannot be delivered, they're required to be substituted. And also our plan, we cannot just come up with a project and just assuming it happen. Actually, we will require, as part of the conformity, to make sure there are reasonably available funds that can support all these investments. And then finally, as down here at the Air District for the AQMP, we also are required to conduct very extensive interagency consultation and public outreach. Next slide, slide 31. Although greenhouse gas or GHG emission is not a criteria pollutant such as the ozone and PM, but actually the measures to reduce GHG does have, a lot of them have the co-benefits of reducing the criteria air pollutant emissions. And ARB actually for this round for all the draft so-called set a much higher regional GHG emission targets. As you may aware, prior to this target, the SCAG's 2035 targets was only 13%, but for this time, they increased to 19%. And with very aggressive strategies and regional initiative, actually, we're really pushing the envelope, try to come up with new strategies to hit that target. So our plan does demonstrate that we can meet that much aggressive targets in 2035. And just to give you an idea, it's a plan. Our plan, we achieve VMT per capita reduction from 23.2 miles in 2016 to 21 miles in 2045, a reduction of 9.5%. In addition, compared to baseline, our plan will increase our share of commuter by transit from 4.7% to 8.1%. It's pretty remarkable because, as some of you may be aware, actually, despite all the transit investment, transit ridership has been declining over the past several years. Last slide. So the next step, as I mentioned earlier, our draft plan is currently under public review through January 24th, and you're welcome to provide any comments. And this slide really lists a few major milestones leading all the way to our regional council adoption in early April. And we need to receive federal approval by June 1st in order to avoid any transportation conformity issues. So let's cover our draft plan. I just want to, I don't know whether you want to ask a question about this or you want me to also cover the safety rule, maybe very brief, a little bit overview update on that. Okay.
Yeah, so Wayne was asking whether you want to talk about the safe rule and the
Sure,
impact.
sure. Okay. So very quick. So for those of you, if you are not familiar, the safe vehicle rule is jointly proposed by the US EPA and National Highway Safety Administration last year in August. And it's really to roll back the so-called CAFE fuel efficiency standards, also the GHG emission standards for model year 2021 through 2026. So early this year, actually on August 24th, the federal agencies finalized part 1 of the safe vehicle rule. So in that safe vehicle rule, the very critical one is really to withdraw a Clean Air Act waiver that was previously granted to AIB back in 2013 that enable AIB to set the ZEF requirements. And as I mentioned, this Part 1 rule is finalized and will become effective on November 26th. So only, I think it's next week, right? Thanksgiving. So it has implications because that because the withdrawal of the waiver, so the ARB's advanced clean car regulation is embedded, no longer available. But the emission factor model, ARB's INFAC model, which is used for emission inventory here at issue 2, because it reflects that advanced clean car regulation, so that model has some issue. And as you know, for SCAG's regional transportation plan and the transportation improvement program, we need to perform a conformity analysis, as I mentioned earlier, the emission analysis using INFAC model. And also for the projects, individual projects, when they need to advance certain stage, they also require to perform so-called project of conformity analysis, similar to what we do for our plan. They also rely on INFAC models. So because of the Part 1 vehicle rule, without any remedy, then we will not be able to do both the regional and the project of conformity. That really have really grave consequences. So in terms of because of the really serious consequences, so the state agencies, whole California, has been really fighting this rollback. So they have been part workshops, as lawsuits have been filed, etc. And SCAG, as part of the MPO throughout the California region, which then has been actively joined that fight. But meanwhile, we also know that's more a long term. But as I mentioned earlier, the rule will become effective November 2026. So we also need the short-term solutions. So that's why we're really appreciative that the AIB, Caltrans, CalStar, they form an interagency working group. They try to identify some near-term solutions. So that's what yesterday's statewide call is about. So the highlight of the state call is AIB already developed so-called adjustment factors. So we can apply to, as SCAG case, to our regional emission analysis to account for the rollback. So SCAG staff has been doing that testing. We hope that we can still meet our conformity. And similarly, those can also be applied to the project level analysis if needed. So let's attend that what yesterday's call about. And I think
this is Sylvia Vanderspeck with CARB, and I just want to highlight a couple things. Is when EPA did put out their Part 1 of the rule, they did not explicitly mention INFAC in there at all. And in fact, while the proposal was at EPA did approve our more recent model. And so we definitely wanted to go out with these adjustment factors so that agencies in California can continue to do conformity and move through the process. And, we're continuing to litigate this matter. And again, this is just part one of the rule, and we're still waiting for the second part of the rule to come out, and there may be further implications.
Sylvia Rongsheng, I don't know if either of you know whether EPA is doing a similar adjustment to the national moves model. We don't know. No? Because there's probably implications there too, at least when the next part of the rule comes out. Did that get to what you needed, Peter?
Yeah, I think it did. You can now do the conformity analysis that you need to do without a challenge that the MFAC is no longer valid. If I remember right, Phil, excuse me, my voice, hold on one sec. If I remember right, did the ozone approval have I want to say a footnote or an asterisk or something? And that's what I was wondering, does this really deal with that issue, and does it allow conformity to move forward?
In fact, when EPA did the final approval on that rule, that footnote was no longer there. But, and so, we don't know why it was deleted, but we do think that the agency can demonstrate conformity with those budgets that are there.
Sylvia, just a question. I don't know whether you were referring to the footnote in our action on the ozone plan,
Yeah,
and that's what was removed.
right.
Okay.
I'm guessing here, but I think the footnote in the proposal was because it wasn't sure when it was going to be finalized, but because the ozone approval was finalized before the
Yeah, just so
the
folks
waiver
know.
was taken away. I'm
Yeah.
sure maybe you can.
Yeah, just
give
so
details.
those that aren't following this in great detail, we did, when we took action on the ozone plans in the AQMP, the ones addressing all three standards, we evaluated the impact of the proposed SAFE rule on our actions. And we determined, with CARB's help and information, that the reductions, that the impact on the reductions depended upon the clean car rulemaking, et cetera, were small enough that would allow us to move forward on the approval.
So that was only on one half of the proposal, not the second half. Like that was a revocation of the waiver for the zero emission, the ZEV mandate, but not necessarily for the. Or did it analyze both?
Just the
ZEV mandate.
The ZEV mandate, which is part 2.
Right. So there's still the other piece that's the rollback of the fuel efficiency standards for the, which EPA did. I mean, they've already. Did that come out? There's word that they're not going to flatten out the curve completely for the CAFE. They were going to do a little bit of a, but it's much lower than the current. It's, what is it, like 20% of the current levels of improvement. Any other questions for Rongsheng on his presentation? Oh, well, Rita, you can go.
Thank you. Rita Loof with RadTech. I just had a quick question on slide 22 of your presentation. Thank you for your detailed presentation. On the reform to parking requirements, can you elaborate a little bit more on the specifics of that? Thank you.
Slide 22, hold on. Okay, actually, in our plan, we have a strategy that really try to work with local jurisdictions, to show that if by reducing some of the parking requirements, really can increase the housing supply. And as I mentioned earlier, SCAG, we are planning agencies, so we really don't have regular authority. So a lot of what we try to do is to providing planning assistance, also providing some grant funding. So like sustainable community strategy funding. We also seek other funding. For example, we have future community initiatives. We sought funding from MLC to implement some pilot projects. So with regard to the parking, in a similar way. So we want to show, yes, by reducing the parking requirements, I think if I remember correctly, each parking space costs like $50,000, $80,000. So by reducing some of the requirements in certain area, priority areas, you can really help the housing supply.
Mark?
Thanks. Mark Carroll with Breathe LA. I have a question regarding slide, well, I have actually two questions, but the first one regarding slide 23, I guess it is, GO zones. You mentioned that the TCMs aren't fuel-based and they're only focused on reducing congestion, not on emissions. But as I look here at the GO zones, you're talking about congestion pricing potentially. Has there been any thought about doing a clean air zone where you're charging people based on the fuel type, so that a diesel fuel vehicle would have to pay a larger fee potentially than a gasoline vehicle, which would pay more than a zero emission vehicle, which would augment the emission reductions as well as reduce congestion.
Yeah, I think so. If you can see from the slides, we're looking to all different options. I think one of the key things is really to charge the VMT-based fee to discourage, the solo driving. And in that regard, I think whether there's a specific about by fuel type, that I'm not certain. I can get back to you. But for Go Zone, as many other strategies, SCAG try to accomplish different objectives, right? So certainly air quality is one of those, and congestion, that's very important for us to the accessibility, mobility, etc. So the Go Zone strategy, as other strategy, also try to generate the revenue, the additional revenue that may be needed for encouraging implementation of some of the strategy I discussed.
So Mark, I think other cities around the world do have, like London has,
Exactly. That's
some
my
of the
point.
access pricing is based on emissions to some degree.
Right, there's about 24 European cities that are focused on this, and I guess my follow-up would be, who's planning on doing this? Where is this? Are you just analyzing the potential for this, or are there cities locally or counties locally that are looking into actually doing this?
I think we're partnering with, as you can see here, there is a joint MP road usage charge and incentive program, pilot program. That's SCAG's involved. And also, as you know, Metro, there's a congestion pricing feasibility study. I think in the Santa Monica, there also some kind of a discussion, and the SCAG staff is certainly involved. And the Go Zone actually originally came from the Monrovia's Go Zone. So that's certainly SCAG is also involved.
So my other question is, I don't see anything in here, and I assume this is a plan through 2045?
Correct.
So I don't see anything in here on what, there's a lot of discussion about a lot of innovations in transportation, a lot of innovations in goods movement. There's no discussion in here about non-vehicular goods movement or non-vehicular transportation, such as the discussion of drones or hyperlink or any of those other technologies that are in development now or being considered now, and how that could I mean, Uber's claiming they're going to fly people around within 3 years. So, is any of that taken into consideration?
Certainly, SCAG staff, those program area staff, they have been looking into that. But because, as you know, this is really early in their development and their deployment. So I think our next plan, I'm sure there will be more discussion on that. But certainly, we did look into those.
I think it's interesting that the value of a parking spot is 2 or 3 times the value of the car. We saw a presentation a couple years ago at our board retreat where someone was talking about shared mobility and autonomous, and he calculated the amount of real estate with shared vehicles, how much real estate you'd free up in Manhattan by getting rid of all the parking spots and all the places for the cars if it was all shared. And it was more than enough to pay for all the electric vehicles and for Uber or whoever else you wanted to. So it's a huge number.
We do have a comment from the web. Actually, we have a comment from Adrian Martinez. And this is to SCAG. If I understand SCAG correctly, part of their freight air quality strategy is the 710 road widening project, which EPA has conformity concerns about. How is road widening a strategy?
This is not my program area. Originally, I invited one of my colleagues from the goods movement. She's supposed to call in, but unfortunately, it's not available. The teleconference is not available. So I try. in terms of this particular roadway, as you know, 17 is a major corridor for goods movement. So even though, yeah, in general, you would think the roadway expansion would not be helpful, but if you have traveled recently, 17, 60, the congestions all the time, so many trucks, right? And so that not only has the congestion issues, but also certainly generate a lot of more emissions because of the heavy congestion. So even though in general the highway roadway expansion does not provide any air quality benefits, but in certain situations, certain like we call it port networks, when you have such a heavy congestions, and we do see some of those expansion play a role not only to help to relieve congestion, which has air quality consequences, so in that perspective, we do have certain projects that really try to address more of the congestion, but which also can have the air quality emission reduction benefits.
Any other questions? Okay, Harvey. The topic is the SCAG's Regional Transportation Plan.
First, back to addendum to my first two questions. Adrian, why aren't you here? What's up?
We'll have to wait for the email to come in since you can't hear
all
him
right,
talk.
okay. The plan that was put up here before in the first presentation, as I referred to, grew out of negotiations with Dr. Burke and senior staff. That we are told to put our solar conversion ideas, and that was the Solar New Deal. This is copywritten in the plan, and there was a copywritten document first on the 12th of August of 16, responding to the energy and climate section of the plan, chapter 10, page 2 and 3, written by Dr. Aaron Katzenstein, whose dissertation from UCI was on methane. Okay, he said there had been over a 30% increase in methane over the last 12 years. Also, AR5, IPCC 13, they're using 68 times global warming potential instead of 20 and 25 that the district and CARB are using. Okay, this is over a 20-year, because it only lasts 12 and a half years in the environment versus 100-year. Okay, also, so these numbers for methane are outrageous. Straight up, they're double the 450 that the state and EPA and the district is using, at least. And then there's nitrous oxide. This document and continuing submittals are all copywritten is in there. And the other copyright that we put in there, we haven't been able to find. It's been purged. Okay, I'm incorporating by reference the administrative committee to the board on the 8th of February of this year. 51 minutes, about 12 and a half is me, Dr. Burke, and at the end, Wayne. Dr. Burke brought up that BARCT, Best Available Retrofit Control Technology, unanimous decision by the state Supreme Court in 12 on coating manufacturers when the district was sued. The district won that case, unanimous decision of the state Supreme Court. It says that it's technology forcing, and that applies to solar as well. We've been talking about this since then in all this litigation. And he said, oh, I remember that. Yeah, that makes sense. Then he goes, you've been coming here for God knows how many years. And you've been talking about this, and you come in and say this one thing different. Maybe there's a footnote here, half a page here, because, but basically, we haven't responded to it, and you're the public. He goes, I tend to agree with you because nobody has contested what you say. This is from a man who managed Muhammad Ali for 50 years. All right? And then Wayne started saying, and it had to do something with recap. Oh, you can't do this in boilers in refineries. And by the way, that 37% that's on the board here for transportation, when you include refineries and stuff, it's 50%, and the district isn't using it, and it has to be used. All right? Okay. So I said, wait a sec, where's your site? I said, we put in 100 exhibits in the 16 plan.
and there was no response to nothing from you folks, from CARB, or from EPA. And Dr. Burke goes, okay, I want you to come to me with the solar stuff. And she goes, I'm not going to read 800 pages. I'll read a few here and a few there. I'm trying to do that. We're trying to do that. We put in the request to get the thumb drive for the Solar New Deal. And in that, it had 66 sections, and 64 of them were PDFs. 2 of them were open, Word. We don't know what's been changed. They were your document, and we're doing a dance with information and whatnot, and legal, and we've submitted this all over the place, okay? This is all in play, and it goes directly out of the negotiations for the plan in the Solar New Deal that are continuing now, and we're trying to get this information together, and it's based on this. Now, EPA didn't...
So Harvey,
did not accept this into the record.
The agenda item is SCAG's regional transportation plan.
Okay. First of all, and I cited this before the board, there are two parts of the health and safety code that kind of contradict each other about whether there's land use in air pollution districts. There is 14414, or like, and it's close to that 14141 of the health and safety code, and one says that you shall give preference to local government and whatnot, and the other one says that local government should work with you. Okay, and this was made note at a board meeting by Mitchell, a board member in CARB, and both Mitchell. Okay, now we've brought up in 617. You want stuff that we can do now? We've been negotiating with manufacturers. One said they could manufacture 5,000 Class 8 vehicles a year. This is 3 years ago. Okay? The stuff's ready. Incorporating by reference yesterday's article on 150Fs from, and the article on Tesla and Ford. This stuff's going into production now. We can implement it, we can do it. Now, the stuff that we did with the PUC 40 years ago, the Low Income Solar Equity Program, it was looking at coordinating all of the programs of the PUC, and then we had the CEC. It was the first time they coordinated and worked together. We had a joint group, and that the 10% earmarked on equity for low income, we tried to get to 20, and it's now at 35% for the state. These are on the PUC programs. This is to complement and to take these so that the sum is greater, the whole is greater than the sum of parts.
So I just realized, thank you, Harvey. I just
Is Adrian
realized that when Adrian submitted his comment, I didn't read the whole thing. He said he would be here in person, but he's on the phone because he got held up at another meeting.
And how about the other EJ people? Something's going on here. I'm not being. I resent this. You know.
Well, you should
I rent this
contact them and tell them to come.
And so should you folks. And I don't know what's coming off here, but it's not right. And I got calls into Dr. Burke. I spoke with Maria's assistant, and I'm into Fabian as well. Now, Fabian also got the September National Geographics on the title of the Arctic's melting, and they only talk about carbon and methane. They do not talk about nitrous oxide, and that's 300 times the global warming. And you've ignored this, and I've tried to bring it to the board to study it. And I brought it to other doctorate level staff members like Aaron and whatnot.
Thank you, Harvey, for your comments.
These were not dealt with at all. The melting of the Arctic and IPCC.
Again, we're still talking about SCAG's regional transportation plan.
Well, you're moving off of bases, and all this is there's AB 32. There's what they call co-benefits. Okay, these are co-benefits. Look, you've got to deal with the political economic system that there's in the last 30 years there's been no increases of income for 2/3 of the population. It's stagnant. All right, this is a big problem, and in terms of equity and the solar transition that could be done just and equitably as soon as possible.
Harvey, we're going to have to move on to other questions.
You got to bring your people here, Adrian, because
I agree. We want as many people here as possible.
The extermination rebellion and the.
So Harvey, thank you for your comments. Anyone else have any comments or questions on Rongsheng's presentation? Okay, if not, any other business? So any other general questions or anything anyone would like to see at the next meeting brought up? Okay, general public comment. And, oh, one public comment.
So, Dr. Fine, thank you very much, and thank you to SCAG for the presentation today. I'd like to circle back to earlier comment, and so I think one number that stands out from the SCAG presentation today is that we're now a region of 19 million people, and that really emphasizes what's at stake for the work around this table. I'm reminded that in college, we experience group projects, and sometimes those are fabulous experiences when people are motivated, bring excellence to the work, and share a common goal. But every once in a while, you may get assigned to a group project where you have a laggard, somebody who wants to coast, doesn't want to pull their weight. And a team is faced with a decision at that point. Do you accept a lower grade on an assignment, or does everybody step up to cover for the laggard and make sure that you meet the goal? Here, I think we're in a situation where we're clearly dealing with a laggard. The federal government is clearly not meeting their obligations. And the question is, are we going to continue to expect them, though they account for 36% of the source, the NOx emissions, are we going to continue to expect that somehow they're going to deliver 63% of the reductions that we need? Are we going to accept a lower outcome for our children, for our parents and our grandparents being able to live out the fullness of their days? Or are we going to step up and do the work that needs to be done to meet these standards? And I think it's really, there's a lot at stake now. And I'm concerned that we're expecting so much from the federal government when they have delivered so little. And I think we need to look for ways to meet these health standards without the assistance that's very unlikely to come from them at this point.
Yeah, thanks. We're actually looking into that very issue. And as Barbara said at the very beginning, there's some strategies that we're actually reviewing. We'll be presenting to our board in closed session for discussion. But we certainly understand and appreciate the perspective that you've had. And I would just say be assured that we're looking into how we can deal with it fairly aggressively.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, with that, we're looking at another meeting in the February-March timeframe. So, Harvey, you had your chance for public comment. We moved on from that.
No, I didn't. This is public comment.
Is this a comment on the next meeting date? That's the agenda item.
I'd like to apologize. Maybe I'll think about this. If I appear to be overreacting. But the worst case scenario on this stuff with the Arctic melting and the positive feedback loop, as cited by Dr. James Anderson, Harvard University, who in the 70s gave us the
Harvey,
climate numbers, is that by 2026, this is the U.S. of Chicago from January of 18, that worst case scenario by 2026 is increase of 18 degrees C. Put that into your pipe and smoke it. Okay? If it's 1% probability, a cousin of mine,
okay, Harvey,
40 years at JPL, is a mathematician, he said that we've got to do it. Okay?
So we're off topic again.
Well, no, we're not. You got your head in the sand like an ostrich. And you have for 30 years, and we've doubled our use of fossil fuels in 30 years.
All right, we're happy to speak to you after, Harvey. So we're gonna
we're litigating. We're litigating.
We're gonna adjourn the meeting.
We're gonna file by the 9th.
So
and all this
we'll see
stuff
you all
put into question by that, and has to be redone
early next year for the next meeting.
Back to the start.
Thank you very much.
And Barsky is outrageous. We'll comment on that.
Yeah. I just actually have, this is Amy Sim for EPA. I just got word that I can state that EPA is planning to issue an advance notice of proposed rulemaking on the low NOx clean truck initiative in December. So before the next meeting, so I would suggest we could perhaps talk about that at your next meeting
Okay.
in February or March.
Thanks for that update, and we'll put that on the agenda. Thanks, Amy.